If you're a parent of an autistic child who's also struggling with anxiety, it can feel, well, just overwhelming, right? Do you try medication, therapy, something else completely? So today, we're going to try to cut through all that noise. We're going to dive into this huge new study of studies. It's a massive review that looked at a whole decade of research to give us the clearest answer yet.
So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to treat it like a detective story, an investigation. We'll follow three main leads, three different paths: medication, some alternative treatments, and then psychological therapies. And by the end, we'll see exactly where the evidence leads. All right, so first things first, let's just set the scene here. Why is this such a big deal? Well, because when autism and anxiety show up together, it creates this challenge that's, well, it's really common, but also incredibly complex. I mean, just take a look at this number right here, 74%. According to the research, that's how many autistic kids, up to 74% of them, between 6 and 18, also have a co-occurring anxiety disorder. We're talking nearly 3 out of every 4 kids. That's a huge, widespread issue.
And here's where it gets kind of tricky. Co-occurring anxiety means you have those classic anxiety symptoms right on top of the core characteristics of autism, but there's an overlap. Is that repetitive behavior a classic sign of ASD, or is it a compulsion that's being driven by anxiety? See what I mean? That overlap, that complexity is exactly why finding the right treatment path is so crucial. So how do we find our way through this maze? Well, we bring in our lead detective. And for this explainer, that's a systematic review. Now, if you're not familiar, think of it as a study of studies. It is honestly one of the most powerful tools in science because it gathers all the best research on one topic to figure out what the most reliable conclusions are.
And believe me, this process was tough. I mean, they started with this mountain of over 6,600 articles, but they had a super strict rule. They would only look at randomized controlled trials. We're talking the gold standard of research, right? The kind where you compare a treatment directly against a control group. It's really the best way to know if something actually works. So after all that filtering, what was left? Just 33 studies from the past decade. So you know the evidence we're looking at today is the absolute best of the best.
Okay, so let's head down our first path. Path number 1, pharmacological treatments, or medication. For lots of anxiety issues, this is often the go-to, the first thing people try. But what does the science actually say when it comes to autistic kids?
So the review zeroed in on 3 major trials for 3 different medications. And if you look at that results column, well, the findings were pretty underwhelming. For all 3 drugs, the researchers found no statistically significant difference when they compared them to a placebo, a sugar pill. That's just the scientific way of saying that any little improvement they saw, it could have easily just been random chance. It wasn't strong enough to prove the drug itself was working.
But here's the other side of that coin, and this is absolutely critical. While the benefits were murky at best, the downsides, they were crystal clear. In that citalopram trial, a jaw-dropping 97.3% of the kids taking the actual medication reported at least one adverse effect. Things like hyperactivity, not being able to sleep, irritability, you name it. So, our verdict on path number 1? It's pretty clear-cut. Based on this huge, comprehensive review, the evidence for using medication to treat anxiety in autistic children is, well, it's weak, and it comes with some really significant concerns about side effects.
Okay, so if medication isn't the slam dunk answer we're looking for, what about other stuff? That brings us right to path number 2. Alternative options. And this category is a real mix of creative, non-traditional approaches.
And honestly, the studies they looked at here were pretty fascinating. I mean, they looked at everything you can imagine. Peer-led theater groups, adopting a cat, aromatherapy using bergamot oil, even using virtual reality to help with phobias. And while some of these things showed little glimmers of hope for very specific issues, like the cat adoption really did seem to help with separation anxiety, the overall results were, really mixed and pretty limited. So what's the verdict on path number 2? It's full of these really cool, intriguing ideas, but they just don't have that strong, large-scale scientific proof. We need to make a big recommendation. These are definitely areas to keep an eye on, for sure, but they aren't giving us a solid solution, at least not yet.
Okay, so path 1, medication, the evidence is weak. Path 2, alternatives, needs more research. That leads us to our third and final path, psychological therapies. And this is where our investigation really takes a turn. This is where the evidence starts to get really interesting.
I mean, just look at this chart. It tells you everything you need to know about where the scientific community has been putting its energy. Out of those 33 elite studies that made the final cut for this review, a whopping 24 of them were looking at psychological interventions. This is clearly where the vast majority of the high-quality research is.
And digging into that pile of research, a pattern emerges that is just impossible to ignore. In 17 of those 24 studies, cognitive behavioral therapy, you probably know it as CBT, was found to be effective. And not just a little effective, statistically effective at reducing anxiety symptoms when compared to the control groups. Now that is a powerful signal in the data.
But wait, the story gets even better, even more specific. Because the researchers found a really important distinction. It wasn't just any CBT. They saw a difference between standard, by-the-book CBT and something they call adapted CBT. This adapted version is specifically tailored for how autistic kids think and learn. We're talking about using things like visual supports, simpler language, flexible pacing, and, this is my favorite part, even weaving in a child's special interests. So, if a kid is passionate about trains, the therapist might use that. They might talk about emotions and coping strategies in terms of different train journeys. How cool is that?
And this quote right here, this basically sums up the single biggest breakthrough from this entire review. The authors say it themselves. Adapted CBT demonstrated superior outcomes. It's not just about doing CBT. It's about personalizing it, adapting it to the unique way that child's brain works. That's the secret sauce. That's what makes the real difference.
So after following all three of our investigative paths, after looking at all the clues and all the evidence, we can finally see a clear path forward. So let's pull it all together and deliver the final verdict.
When you just lay all three paths out side by side like this, the conclusion is just bam, it's right there. The strength of the evidence for medication and for those alternative treatments, it's low right now. But the evidence for psychological therapies, it is clearly high.
So here it is, the final verdict from our investigation. While yes, medication and alternative options might have a role to play, and they definitely need more research, the single most robust, science-backed recommendation for treating anxiety in autistic kids is psychological therapy. And more specifically, it's cognitive behavioral therapy that is thoughtfully and carefully adapted to their individual needs and strengths.
Now, any good detective will tell you that it's just as important to know what you don't know. And this research does have some limits. For one, most of the participants in these studies were boys, and they tended to have IQs over 70. A lot of the studies also had pretty short follow-up periods, and they struggled with real-world problems like families dropping out. So what does that tell us? It tells us we need more research, more diverse research, to make sure these incredible treatments can work for absolutely everyone. And that really leaves us with one last massive question to think about. The science has pointed the way. The evidence is clear. We know what works best. So the next great challenge, the question for all of us, is this. How do we make these incredibly effective, highly specialized therapies accessible to every single child and every family who needs them?